and gentlemen, you're watching NDTV. Former US President Donald Trump has reignited a huge controversy by banning Harvard University from enrolling new international students, citing national security concerns and also Harvard University's alleged ties to China. Now, the Department of Homeland Security has also said that Ivy League school Harvard University in this case has created an unsafe campus environment by allowing anti-American, pro-terrorist agitators to assault Jewish students on campus. This sudden move affects over 6,800 foreign students from 140 countries, including about 800 students from India. It also threatens the funding that Harvard University receives from across the world. Harvard University, of course, is resisting these actions, filing a lawsuit and asserting its right to academic freedom against government overreach, leading to an escalating legal and institutional battle. Now, China has slammed this action as politically motivated, but can the crackdown expand to other elite universities in the United States of America, intensifying Trump's campaign against perceived foreign influence in academia? And what does it mean for Indian students aspiring to go to these reputed institutions, and what does it mean for America? That is what we ask tonight, and that's what we discuss tonight. Joining me now is a panel of experts. We have with us Madhavan Narayanan, who's a senior journalist. We'll also be joined by former diplomat Ashok Sajjanhar. We're also joined by Professor Andrew Latham, who is author and professor of political science. We have Paramjot Kaur, who's a student aspiring to go to the United States of America. We'll also be joined by Anand Ahuja, who's a New York-based attorney and also vice president for Indian Americans for Trump. Thank you all of you for joining me on this broadcast. To you, Mr. Narayanan, first, what are the broader implications of this decision for international students in the US, particularly Indians? Because we can go on saying that no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities should be doing, teaching, who should be they hiring. But clearly there are going to be consequences. How should India look at this conflict? I saw your posts on X, and you also suggest that this should be seen more as an opportunity than a crisis. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Let's divide this into three parts, Vasudha, to be getting clarity on that issue. First up, you asked about students. For students, it's the toughest decision because I was loud thinking on long-term ideas of what happens when Harvard gets into trouble like this with the US presidency, which is totally unprecedented. For students, especially Indian students, it's about betting your career, your life, and lots of money in fees and transport and everything. So when there is a sheer uncertainty surrounding this, it makes even COVID look weird because at least COVID, you had the vaccines and normal process to go through. So this makes it a very, very difficult situation for parents and students because they would feel very uneasy. And maybe that's the message that Trump wants to send. But this is something which will obviously become part of the trade negotiations, I suspect, because India is a very talent-oriented economy, increasingly reliant on collaboration with the US on this. So that is one critical thing. Otherwise, it's up in the air. The second thing we need to look at is that Harvard has sued Trump on this. So there are lots of American constitutional issues and freedom issues. And, after all, this is a country that cherishes both business freedom, free market economics, and academic freedom, at least theory.
Right.
In theory. For the first time, we're getting that under attack. So there are issues related to what this means for the US in terms of its own laws.
Right.
And to that extent, if there is a quick fix solution from the judiciary in the US, maybe Indians can heave a sigh of relief. But my loud thinking on X, on which you spoke about, was to see whether what's so great about American higher education, because now there's a lot of money floating in Asia. We have now very good, for example, Manipal University in India has produced Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft. So we do have our own pockets of excellence. And now increasingly, we also have the resources, not only from India, but also from NRIs and Indian Americans. So I'm loud thinking about the idea that India could be leading or joining collaborative efforts in Asia to create centers of excellence, matching Harvard with or without, either to rival Harvard or in partnership. This is loud thinking.
Right.
But we have to really take note of the inward-looking behavior of President Donald Trump. And this is a new challenge the entire planet is facing. Well, he's just imposed a 50% tariffs on Europe, which
Right.
is supposed to be a Western ally. So all of us have to go back to the drawing board in some ways. That's what I
Absolutely.
feel.
So multi-layered problems there, and of course we will have different approaches also. We have a student here, Paramjot Kaur. I was looking at your posts on LinkedIn as well. Paramjot, can you also tell us a little bit about what this decision means to you as a student, and how do you see a solution to this?
Okay, so definitely, when I actually came across this news yesterday, it was 12:30, and my friend called me up. He said, "Did you see the news?" And I was completely devastated by this act, honestly. As someone who has been working to get into Harvard since 6 years, it was almost revolting to think that they have denied the access for us international students to even apply. It was not about getting accepted, waitlisted, or rejected at all. It was about us trying to get our right to education. And listening this was completely disheartening for me. For example, I'll show you my all journals. They are filled with Harvard and Harvard. It's everything Harvard. I have a vision board about Harvard. I want that institution not because of name or everything, but the fact that it gives so much exposure to us Indian students and other international students as well. Not just me. I have my other friends who are aspiring to get into other IVs, and and when they heard this too, they were also like, "Okay, next they may target IB and the other IB plus and even the T20s. We do have a right to education, and as far as the solution is concerned, we as international students have not done anything. We are there to make a change. We are here to make a change. In fact, I am here speaking in front of you all to make a change right now.
Right.
So the fact that that's just my point of view. I think it's better to sort it out for both of the Trump government and as well as the Harvard.
So this is beyond the control of students. Professor Andrew Latham, how do you see this decision impacting US's position as a global education destination? This is something Mr. Madhavan also talking about. And also Harvard's own reputation, because there are these charges of anti-Semitism. How are these charges being looked at, and how do you see this impacting US's own position? Because everybody at some point, all students aspire to go there, because of the exposure that you get. It's seen as a land of dreams, but this clearly doesn't seem to be aligned with that idea.
Yeah, it really is. I think everybody, not everybody, but many students want to come to not just the Ivies, but even places like Macalester, a kind of preeminent liberal arts college. They really want to come here. They see it as a stepping stone or a rung on a ladder. And now the Trump administration is making things difficult. First of all, it attacked Columbia University, and now it's going after Harvard University. And the reasons seem silly to me. Failure to comply with the diversity, equity, and inclusion rules that the administration has developed. The idea that some of these students are spies. I have so many international students, including many from India and many from China, and I would bet my bottom dollar they're not spies. And they're not anti-Semites either. They're in fact really talented students. But here's the other piece that needs to be put on the table. A lot of higher education institutions in the United States depend on international students because they pay the full fee. I mean, they're a huge revenue stream. Most American students in the Ivies and in places like Macalester, they get huge discounts off the $80 or $90 or $100,000 per year sticker price. But a lot of international students pay the full thing. So it's an important revenue stream in higher education. And so quite apart from the student-oriented piece, which I'm really sensitive to, the way in which current international students at Harvard are going to be forced to transfer. I hope they all come to Macalester, by the way.
Okay. That's very interesting. Mr. Ahuja, I'll come back to you, Professor. Mr. Ahuja, would you also explain the politics of this? How do you see this? Do you see this as personal vendetta? Because the government's action also follow Harvard's resistance to changes in curriculum, something that was also being demanded by administration. How do you see the politics of this?
No, honestly speaking, I can actually relate to my own student life also here when I was a student. I'm really surprised. When I was a student, my life was from classroom to library and library to classroom. Uh, I'm just talking when I was a student at the law school here. So I'm really surprised how these students, when they come here, and the purpose of their coming here is to get higher education. It's not that easy to get Rhodes Scholarship and to come to this country. They come here and then instead of concentrating and focusing on their studies, they are participating in all these political activities, especially pro-Hamas groups when we see demonstration. Recently, we saw that the Rhodes Scholar PhD student who was basically self-reported herself from the country. The question is how and when these students they get time, we have to understand the whole politics. Why Trump has now taken this particular action. Communist Party of China has infiltrated its students, its members in the Harvard University in the garb of students. So these students are here. The question is, what is the purpose of the university? The purpose of university should be to impart education. What actually universities are doing in the United States. Students' basically objective should be to come here and get their education, the purpose for which they are come here. What
But
these
Mr.
students
Ahuja,
are doing.
education
I'm not saying,
educational
I'm
institutions are also opening, it's also about opening your mind to a lot of ideas, isn't it? Like student politics is not a bad thing after all. In fact, we have a whole host of leaders in the ruling party and in the opposition who come from political, student politics.
Vasudha, with due respect, you are on student visa. You get I-20 to come here to study. You are not here to come and participate in politics. I know a lot of people, they are arguing First Amendment right, First Amendment right. First Amendment right also has its own restriction. Time, place, and manner is there in the First Amendment also. You have to understand, getting a student visa is not as a matter of right. It's your privilege. So you get a privilege, you come to this country. It's just like you throw a party in your house and your guests come there and they say it's a matter of rights, the First Amendment. We can come here, we can scream here, we can
Mr.
shout here,
Narayanan,
we can protest here.
Yes. Mr. Madhavan, would you like to take that? Because I do understand that as students, if we feel that there's something wrong happening in the world, I do have the right to at least talk about it.
Go home to your country and protest there. Nobody is stopping you.
Okay.
Let these students go back to their country. Let Chinese students go to China and protest against Israel. Let Indian students go back to India and protest against Israel and be pro-Hamas. Let me see to what extent government of India allows its own citizens to participate in pro-Hamas demonstrations.
So you're saying that students should respect the fact that they have been given that legal status and they should just confine themselves to studies. Madhavan Narayanan, before I go to Ambassador Sajjan, would you quickly respond to that? Do you feel that this also in some ways goes against the idea of freedom, autonomy of campuses and students' own development as individuals who can be thinking, who could be given that agency to take decisions for themselves?
It's not just about the agency, it's about the philosophy of education itself. In fact, in response to my post on X, somebody said that humanity should not be taught. That kind of radical thinking is now being encouraged. Whereas I look at student protests similar. See, what a laboratory is to a chemistry student, a debate or a protest is to a liberal arts student. It is a laboratory in which you understand human values, including political values. So India and US are both open societies. I don't want to bring in China here because it has a different philosophy. But whether you look at the rights of man in the US or whether you look at the preamble of the Indian Constitution, they enjoy similar philosophical convergence. So when you have this kind of a situation, to treat everything from an inward, it's like you're treating education not like a pursuit of knowledge with academic freedom, but like some trade issue. And many, in fact, this whole view doesn't even understand what humanities education is all about and passes judgment on this.
Okay.
So that is a very serious issue that we need to consider.
Okay.
And apart from that, so anybody can put any law. North Korea also has laws and somebody will say this is the law. It's not about law. It's about the principles underlying education.
Yeah,
that's what professors know this. But there is an anti-intellectual movement across the planet now. And it's sad to see US, which was an inspiration, becoming increasingly, surprisingly, this is a black swan movement for anybody who believes in freedom as an ideal.
Okay, Mr. Ahuja, I'll come to you, but Ambassador Sajanhar, thank you for waiting for so long. Do you also see this pressure, the move that the Trump administration has taken as part of a larger political strategy aimed at what would one say, reshaping elite universities, diversity or race-based admissions, or even a perceived liberal bias?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vasudha. I quite agree with you. I think this is basically a message that is being sent out, making Harvard University as an example and sending out a message to the other universities that unless you fall in line, you are also at the risk of facing a similar treatment. So I think that is very clear that the Trump administration has made out what it would like to see. It'd like to see peace in the campuses. I think, if you permit, I'll just make two additional comments. One is, in terms of the students, what they are taught and how they react and respond. The other is, having been in the field of diplomacy, and I have seen it myself, there are countries which go into different regions, and, there's been mention made of China here on this panel, as also, I think, as far as the United States, the Trump administration, in terms of promoting violence and in terms of promoting anti-Semitism and also promoting the thinking and ideals of the Communist Party of China. We know that there are countries which seek to buy influence in different educational institutions. And I think one needs to be mindful of that and, focus on that rather than tarnishing the whole, architecture as it exists with the same brush, and for some mistakes that are committed by some people, right, stopping everything around. The last point that I would like to make here is, as far as freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of protest, but how do you define protest? Can it go violent? Of course, writing your pieces and speaking about it and trying to have discussions and arguments, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly all right. But I think when it goes beyond that, into the area of violent protests and demonstrations, I think there has to be a limit, a line that has to be drawn in terms of defining freedom.
That's very well said. Professor Andrew Latham, as a professor, how do you suggest universities draw these boundaries out when it comes to focus on academic curriculum and also giving students the kind of freedom of expression that they need desperately, because they're also growing up to be individuals and men and women?
Yeah, I would agree with some of my colleagues who drew a distinction between rights and privileges, especially of visa holders as opposed to citizens. But I would also want to double down on what business we're in, essentially, which is education. And that education takes place about 10% at a liberal arts colleges like Macalester, about 10% in classrooms. And the rest of it is in dorms, and it's in various other settings where they're learning to flourish as human beings and learning the arts of freedom, which is what a liberal arts education is meant to be about. And this is the other thing I will say, is that I'm not trying to single out our Chinese students, but I guess I have to at this point. They go back to China with an appreciation of American liberal democracy, which I like to think 10, 15, or 20 years down the road will change China profoundly.
Right.
The more Chinese students we can have studying the liberal arts, John Locke and David Hume and all those guys, and not just chemistry or engineering, but the liberal arts, and then they go back home, I know for a fact that when some of them go back home, they are, if I can use this term, evangelizing for the Western liberal democratic tradition. And you know what? I just think that's good. So not only good for the students in terms of, their flourishing as dignified human beings,
okay,
but also changing the politics in parts of the world that are, I'm going to use the term, retrograde in terms of liberal democratic ideals.
Okay. Quickly, Madhavan Narayanan, how do you see other universities adapting to something like this? Do you see them making those adjustments, or do you see a move, a wave of resistance in the, amongst these elite institutions? Do you see this escalating?
Let me put it in very simple words. Ultimately, what universities are really known for are teaching methods, the quality of the faculty, and the syllabi they have, and not for the buildings and the campuses. So there will always be, like there is in business, competition, and some will try to endure themselves to the establishment. That always happens historically. But we in India salute Saraswati as the goddess of education, and there is always a symbolism of Saraswati being a symbol of freedom and subtlety and innocence. And that, to that extent, that will have to be carried wherever. And
right.
there will great professors are not going to be, if they were after money, they would be on Wall Street. But they have more knowledge, and the Wall Streeters are their students. This is what we need to appreciate. So if you're not after money and if you're after higher values, you cannot put them in a box. It's not an Aladdin's gin that you can control by being a real estate salesman of the kind Donald Trump is. But he will learn the hard way sooner or later, because the world will be opening up sooner or later to welcome the professors of Harvard. In Sanskrit, we have a saying, Vidwan sarvatra pujyate. The learned are honored everywhere.
Right.
And, it's time for Trump to learn that.
Absolutely. Mr. Ahuja, last word from you, sir. There's increasingly this feeling that Trump's America is not welcoming of students from foreign countries. Especially there is a feeling like this even amongst Indian students. How do you change something like that?
If you don't mind, before I respond to that question, I would like to respond to Professor Latham's comments. He mentioned that 10% students, especially we are talking of liberal arts, they study 10% in the classroom and 90% in the dorms. So my only suggestion then in that respect is, then why don't you codify it and make it as a part of your university syllabus that 90% your curriculum will be to participate in demonstration, and for that at least students will get some credit, so they don't have to actually lose those credits. Secondly, as a student of law, I always say that whatever the law is, whether it's right or wrong, it's not my job to judge whether the law is right or wrong. If law is there, it should be respected.
Right.
We are nobody to question why this law is there. And the third thing I will say that I personally believe that it's an eye-opener for India also, the way India is also getting a lot of foreign students without any proper checking who is coming in the country. This should be an eye-opener for India also. I personally believe that Trump is in the right direction. His priority here in this country is to make America great again and to make America safe again. So from safety point of view, it's very important that we maintain our culture, we maintain our American
Mr. Ahuja, completely out of time. Thank you all of you for joining me on this broadcast. The Harvard-Trump episode gives a worrying assessment of the state of educational institutions and also the future of these universities that have remained a dream for many Indian students for several years. But how can this sudden exclusion of international students from Harvard reshape global perceptions of the US as a welcoming academic destination? That remains the big question. With that, it's a wrap on the show. More news and updates on the other side.